Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a world sculpted by rivers, ruled by gods, and woven with threads of ancient magic. Welcome to Ancient Secrets and Soothing Sounds, your weekly escape into the whispers of history. Imagine a land where life flowed like the Tigris and Euphrates, a cradle of civilization where the very air hummed with unseen forces. We're journeying back, way back, to Mesopotamia. Think sprawling cities, towering ziggurats reaching for the heavens, and people who navigated their world with a blend of awe, reverence, and a healthy dose of pragmatic magic. Now, before you picture yourself as a wise sorcerer conjuring a rainstorm, let's be real for a second. Life back then wasn't exactly a spa day. You might not survive your first encounter with a particularly grumpy lion, or perhaps a rather territorial neighbor. The idea of daily life might have involved a bit more, shall we say, immediate danger. But it was precisely within this vibrant, often challenging tapestry of existence that magic wasn't just a spectacle, it was a fundamental tool for understanding, protecting, and navigating the world. It was about finding order in chaos, seeking comfort in the unknown, and forging connections with the divine and the spiritual realms. It was the ancient Mesopotamian way of coping, of thriving, and of finding a sense of control in a world that offered very little of it. We'll be exploring how they used amulets to ward off sickness, how they interpreted the stars for guidance, and how even the simplest of objects could hold profound protective power. It's a world of ritual, of belief, and of a deeply ingrained understanding of the forces that shape their reality. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright, as the gentle hum of your fan creates that familiar comforting drone, and the last of the day's worries begin to drift away, let's step through the veil of time. Forget your modern anxieties for a moment. We're heading somewhere far older, somewhere the very soil remembers the dawn of humanity. Picture this. You're not sitting in your cozy chair anymore. You're standing on the edge of a vast, flat plain, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked earth, and something else, something ancient and alive. Before you, two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, snake their way across the landscape, their waters the lifeblood of this land. This is Mesopotamia, the very birthplace of so much of what we understand today: cities, writing, law, and of course magic. It's a place where civilization wasn't just built, it was cultivated, slowly, patiently, over millennia. Now, as you take your first tentative steps into this world, don't expect grand wizards with pointy hats and glowing staffs. Though some of the magic here is pretty mind-bending, trust me. This isn't about dramatic spells to conquer the world, or Hollywood-style fireballs. This is about the quiet, everyday magic that permeated the lives of the people who called this place home. Think of it less as a fantasy novel and more as a very, very old survival guide, infused with a deep understanding of the spirits that they believed inhabited everything around them. You see, from the very first glimmers of human awareness, long before the great Sumerian cities rose from the dust, our ancestors looked at the world and saw more than just trees and rocks. They saw spirits everywhere, in the rustling leaves, in the babbling brooks, in the very earth beneath your feet. And to make sense of it all, to gain a little control over the unpredictable forces that governed their lives, the scorching sun, the life-giving floods, the sudden storms, the terrifying predators, they turned to magic. Think of those early shamans, the wise men and women, who were believed to be able to journey into the spirit world. They were the original spiritual consultants, the ones you'd go to when you needed a prayer answered or a blessing invoked. And if you couldn't get to a shaman, well, there was art. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit cave, the air cool and damp. You're carefully painting an image of a majestic stag on the cave wall, perhaps a bison, its powerful form rendered with surprising skill. You believe, deep in your bones, that by capturing its likeness, by understanding its essence on this sacred canvas, you're gaining a measure of power over the hunt. It's a way of communicating with the animal's spirit, ensuring a successful chase, bringing sustenance back to your community. It's not just art, it's a prayer, a plea, a connection. As societies grew more complex, so did their understanding of the spiritual realm. Around 4000 BCE, in places like Sumer and ancient Egypt, the structure of their spiritual lives began to mirror their social order. Gods started to parallel kings and priests, holding sway over city-states and kingdoms. And this is where writing comes in, a truly revolutionary invention that finally gives us glimpses, however fleeting, into their world. We know more about these more official religions and the magic that accompanied them than we do about those earlier, more nebulous Neolithic beliefs. And within these burgeoning societies, magic wasn't just about good luck charms. It could be deliberately harmful, too. Imagine a Babylonian craftsman, his brow furrowed in concentration, carefully breaking the legs of a clay figurine. Why? To prevent a ghost from wandering, to bind a malevolent spirit to a specific place, to stop it from causing trouble. Or picture a sorceress, her eyes narrowed with intent, whispering incantations, trying to trick the great god Marduk into inflicting disease upon an enemy. It was a potent and sometimes dangerous force, but it wasn't all dark arts. Sometimes, magic was simply a way of acknowledging and acting upon the belief in forces that needed to be appeased. Figurines buried beneath thresholds, for instance, were placed there not to attack, but to politely ask evil spirits to keep on their way, to maintain a kind of spiritual boundary. You might be surprised to see how many elements of what we consider later magic were already present, even in these early days. Ancient Babylonians and Egyptians were already wearing protective amulets, little talismans imbued with power. They were creating scrolls filled with spells, literally books of magic. In Egypt, these spells were even inscribed on the walls of tombs, a magical insurance policy for the soul's perilous journey into the afterlife. Words, too, whether spoken or written, held immense power. The ancient Greeks and Romans, for instance, produced curse tablets, small sheets of lead or pottery, inscribed with a dark desire, accompanied by specific ritualistic phrases. The belief was that by writing it down, by giving it form and voice, you were essentially telling the universe to make it happen. It was a very direct way of communicating your wishes, even your malice, to the cosmos. And as you stand here, feeling the gentle breeze that perhaps carries the whispers of ancient rituals, you might notice some familiar echoes. Sympathetic magic, the idea that like cures like, that a yellow potion might cure jaundice because it shares the color of the ailment. That was a concept known to the ancient Egyptians. The Greeks, ever so ingenious, developed the idea of binding, the ability of a magician to gain physical or spiritual control over another person or object. Imagine binding the very moon in the sky. And as we delve deeper into the written records, we even start to hear names. There's Circe, the enchantress from Homer's Odyssey, who, with a flick of her wrist and a magical potion, turned Odysseus's companions into pigs. And then there's Eryctho, a sorceress so formidable that the Roman poet Lucan recounts her raising a corpse from the dead simply by pouring the spittle of a rabid dog upon it. Quite the resume, wouldn't you say? While some cultures, like Japan, even went so far as to establish a ministry of magic, seriously, a whole government department dedicated to the occult. Others retained a more fluid, expansive sense of spiritual power. Amaya, for example, observed the cosmos with intense scrutiny, understanding vast cycles of time, inhaling psychotropic smoke to open doors to the spirit world, and believing in spirit animals that accompanied powerful magicians. Their beliefs, in many ways, echoed those earliest Neolithic whispers of magic. In this ancient world, where chaos and death were never very far away, the desire to simply push them back, even for a short while, meant that magic was not an option, it was an essential part of life. It's this deep-seated human need to understand, to connect, and to influence that we'll be exploring as we journey through the ancient roots of magic. So breathe deeply, feel the gentle current of time carrying you back. This is your invitation as you continue to stand on this ancient Mesopotamian plain, feeling the weight of millennia around you. Let's rewind the clock even further. Imagine stepping out of the relatively recent past and into the deep, shadowy reaches of prehistory. We're talking about a time so far back, it's hard for our modern minds to even grasp it. We're talking about Neanderthals, our ancient hominin cousins. And even they, as early as 95,000 years ago, were showing signs of something beyond mere survival. Picture a cave in Iraq, a place of shelter, and perhaps something more. There, a small child was carefully buried, not just tossed aside, but buried, with a reverence that suggests a dawning understanding of an afterlife, a belief that this little life, though ended, was not entirely gone. It's a subtle hint, perhaps, but it speaks volumes about the nascent spiritual and magical impulses stirring within humanity. Then, as we move forward, imagine these early people finding significance in the very stones around them. In caves, you might stumble upon pebbles that, with a little imagination, look remarkably like human faces. Perhaps they were talismans, or simply objects that stirred a sense of recognition, a connection to something familiar in the vastness of the natural world. And then, around 2500 BCE, you witness the monumental efforts of people building stone circles. Think of Stonehenge, or the sprawling alignments of Carnac in Brittany, France. These aren't just piles of rocks. They are deliberate constructions aligned with the sun's rising or setting at specific times of the year. They are calendars, observatories, and most importantly, places of ritual. The fact that medieval locals believed the Carnac stones were a Roman army magically turned to stone just shows how profoundly these ancient structures could inspire wonder and a sense of the uncanny. These were not the actions of purely practical, unthinking beings. They indicate a worldview that was becoming increasingly sophisticated, increasingly religious, and by extension, increasingly magical. It's in this fertile ground of evolving belief that magic truly begins to intertwine with religion, as early humans learned to control their environment, inventing tools and mastering fire, incredible achievements that gave them a sliver of power in a world that often felt overwhelmingly powerful. They also became acutely aware of just how vast the forces were that remained stubbornly out of their control. The sun, rising and setting with predictable regularity, yet still a source of immense power and mystery. Birth and death, the ultimate transitions, defying easy explanation, and the daily, often desperate struggle to hunt for food, the constant dance with survival. To grapple with these profound mysteries, our earliest ancestors began to conceive of spirit forces. They believed they could invoke these spirits, communicate with them, and perhaps even influence them to gain an advantage. This fundamental belief in supernatural forces, coupled with a very human desire to use them to gain some sway over the physical world, has been a constant thread running through societies ever since. It's the deep-seated instinct to find meaning and agency, even when faced with the overwhelming unknown. Consider the act of hunting. For early human communities, it wasn't just a way to fill bellies, it was an essential act of survival, a sacred undertaking. Even in societies that continued this practice into more modern times, like the Inuit of Arctic Canada, hunting is viewed as a solemn ritual. It involves taking the life of another being, a being they believed possessed a soul, and therefore deserved respect and a proper acknowledgement of that spirit. Stone Age peoples likely felt much the same. Imagine yourself, around 17,000 years ago, venturing into the barely accessible depths of caves like Lascaux in France. These aren't just any caves. They are adorned with stunning paintings of people hunting wild animals, stags, horses, bison, cattle, bears. These aren't mere cave doodles. They're likely connected to rituals intended to make hunting expeditions more successful, or perhaps to appease the spirits of the animals themselves. You might be painting these images, chanting softly, visualizing the successful chase, trying to imbue the hunters with the skill and protection of the spirits. It's a powerful fusion of art, belief, and practical need. And think about the care taken with the dead. The Jericho skull, dating back to around 7500 BCE, is a poignant example. This skull was found partially covered in plaster, its eye sockets filled with shells to recreate the features of the deceased. This wasn't just about preserving a physical likeness, it was likely part of an ancestor cult, a way of maintaining a connection with those who had passed on, perhaps seeking their guidance or protection. Mourning, in this context, wasn't just an expression of grief, it was one of the shared rituals that helped bind the society together, a communal acknowledgement of loss, and a way to honor the continuity of life. The cave paintings at Lascaux, dating from around 15,000 BCE, offer another fascinating glimpse into this prehistoric magical thinking. Nearly 900 animals are depicted there, most likely as part of a magic hunting ritual. You can almost feel the collective energy of the artists, the shamans, the hunters, all focused on a shared purpose. It's as if the very act of painting these creatures, of imbuing them with vibrant life on the cave walls, was an invocation. Then there's the pervasive theme of fertility. Without new life, any tribe, any community would eventually die out. Many figurines of women with exaggerated hips and breasts have been discovered in caves, silent testaments to this fundamental preoccupation. The physical characteristics of these figures are thought to suggest that people were calling upon a mother goddess, a powerful feminine force, to bless them with children, to ensure the continuation of their lineage. Some of these statuettes were small enough to be held in the hand, portable embodiments of this prayer for fertility, like the famous Venus figurines, ancient European sculptures believed to date from the Paleolithic era. The striking lack of facial detail on many of these Venus figures isn't a sign of artistic incompetence. It's likely intentional, giving them a universal appeal, allowing any woman from any time or place to see herself reflected in their timeless plea for life. But perhaps even more potent than the concerns of hunting, fertility, or the mysteries of the earth was the primal fear of death itself. Formal burials, dating back as early as 60,000 BCE, have been found containing bones scattered with red ochre, a substance often associated with blood, life, and ritual. Some burials even included flowers or necklaces, carefully placed to accompany the deceased into the next life, a comforting thought that perhaps they wouldn't be entirely alone. At Kabara Cave in Israel, Neanderthals buried several skeletons and skull bones, hinting at post-mortem rites, ceremonies performed after death. And there's evidence that early peoples, too, harbored a fear of dead spirits. At Gough's Cave in Somerset, incisions on bones dating back around 15,000 years suggest the practice of ritual cannibalism. Now, before you get too squeamish, this wasn't about hunger. The aim was likely twofold: to acquire the powers of the dead, to absorb their strength or wisdom, or, perhaps more importantly, to prevent their spirits from lingering and inflicting harm on the living. It was a way of neutralizing a perceived threat, a grim but understandable response to the unknown. This belief that the natural world, including its landscapes and inhabitants, was imbued with magical or supernatural powers, is known as animism. Naturally distinctive geographical features, like a series of rock formations at Nairo in Uganda, possibly dating back as far as 12,000 years, became shrines. They were adorned with geometric paintings and visited by early peoples who would make offerings to the spirits believed to reside there. And then, there are the animal-shaped carvings, often depicting human-animal hybrids. The 40,000-year-old lion man, found in a cave in southern Germany, is a prime example. These were venerated, perhaps as totems, spirit animals with whom a tribe had a special magical relationship, a kind of ancient spiritual partnership. Maintaining good relations with the myriad spirits that populated their world was vital for these early peoples. This is where the ritual specialists, the shamans, emerged. They were the intermediaries, the communicators, the ones who could bridge the gap between the human and the spirit realms. Shamans could, it was believed, transport themselves to these spirit realms through trances. How did they achieve this? Through chanting, the rhythmic, hypnotic banging of drums, or by smoking or ingesting hallucinogenic herbs and other psychotropic substances. It was a deliberate, often arduous journey into altered states of consciousness. Consider the headdress made of stag antlers, found at the 11,000-year-old site of Star Carr in Yorkshire. It's highly likely this was part of a shaman's ritual attire, helping them to embody or connect with the spirit of the stag. And rock art discovered in Siberia offers an intriguing interpretation, an X-ray view of the interior skeleton of a subject. This artistic choice is thought to represent the suspended state between life and death, the liminal space that allowed the shaman to travel into the spirit world. These beliefs, astonishingly, persisted among indigenous peoples in Siberia right up until modern times, a testament to the enduring power of these ancient practices. While the earliest beliefs in magic might stretch back a staggering 100,000 years, many of these core ideas have survived, in some form until surprisingly recently. Even something as seemingly simple as amber, the fossilized resin of prehistoric pine trees, held magical significance. Treasured even in Neolithic times, the ancient Greeks believed it was literally solidified rays of the sun. Its distinctive color and translucency made it highly prized, and the fact that it's electrostatic, giving off sparks when rubbed, added to its reputation for warding off danger. It became known as a healing stone, found predominantly along the shores of the Baltic Sea. Despite its comparative rarity, necklaces and pendants made from amber are a remarkably common archaeological find, speaking to its enduring appeal and perceived power across vast stretches of time and distance. It's as if these little pieces of ancient sunlight carried a warmth and protection that transcended the ages. As you continue to absorb the ancient atmosphere, let's shift our focus slightly, still within the mesmerizing world of Mesopotamia, but now looking at the structured ways these people interacted with the divine. Remember how we talked about the spiritual life becoming more ordered, mirroring society? Well, here in Mesopotamia, that order was quite pronounced. Beneath the grand pronouncements of the official pantheon, you had a whole other layer of existence, a world teeming with spirits and demons, some benign, some decidedly not. At the very top, holding court in the celestial realms, were the supreme deities. Think of Enlil, the Assyrian sky god, often considered the king of the gods, wielding immense power over the very fabric of the cosmos. Then there was Ea, the god of wisdom, of fresh water, of magic itself, a benevolent figure who often intervened on behalf of humanity. These were the big players, the ones whose favor you'd want to curry, whose blessings you'd pray for during important festivals or times of crisis. Their temples were grand affairs, centers of power and devotion, where priests performed elaborate rituals to maintain cosmic harmony. They were the divine rulers, paralleling the earthly kings and nobility who governed the city-states. You could imagine these rulers, perhaps clad in ornate robes, making offerings, participating in processions, seeking the divine approval that legitimized their earthly authority. It was a cosmic reflection of power, a way of saying, just as you have rulers here, so too does the universe. But the divine hierarchy didn't stop at the highest gods. Below them, you had a vast array of lesser deities, each with their specific domains. There were gods of agriculture, of healing, of war, of love, and a whole host of others, ensuring that no aspect of human life was left unattended by the divine. And then, crucially for our understanding of magic, there were the guardian spirits. These weren't necessarily worshipped in the same way as the major gods, but they were vital for daily protection. Think of them as the celestial security guards of your home and your community. They were the ones you'd appeal to when you needed to keep a specific threat at bay, or to ensure a smooth journey or a successful harvest. The priests of these temples, the ones who dedicated their lives to serving these gods, were the gatekeepers of this spiritual world. They were the conduits, the ones who understood the intricate rituals, the specific prayers, the correct offerings needed to appease or invoke these divine beings. They held the sacred knowledge, passed down through generations, and their role was crucial in maintaining the balance between the human and divine realms. You can imagine these priests, their heads shaved, their robes immaculate, moving with practiced grace through the temple precincts, performing ceremonies that were both deeply religious and intrinsically magical. They were not just performers of rites, they were practitioners of a profound cosmic art. This structured approach to the divine wasn't just about worship, it was about establishing order. In a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable, this hierarchical system provided a framework for understanding one's place in the universe. The gods had their roles, humans had theirs, and the priests navigated the space in between. This ordered cosmos was seen as inherently good, a reflection of the benevolent intentions of the creator gods. However, as you'll soon discover, this ordered world was constantly under threat from forces that sought to disrupt it. And understanding these threats and how to counter them was a significant part of Mesopotamian magic. It was a world where the divine was not an abstract concept, but a tangible, influential presence in every aspect of life, from the grandest pronouncements of kings to the humblest plea for protection. The very structure of their pantheon was a testament to their desire for order, and their magic was the practical application of that desire, a way to actively participate in maintaining that divine balance. It was a constant dialogue between the earthly and the heavenly, a conversation punctuated by prayer, ritual, and the subtle pervasive power of magic. Now you might be thinking, okay, so they had gods and spirits, but what about the really scary stuff? Well, hold on to your hats, because beneath that gleaming layer of supreme deities and benevolent guardians, Mesopotamia's spiritual landscape was also populated by beings of a decidedly more unsettling nature. These weren't just abstract evils, they were concrete threats, forces that could and did wreak havoc on everyday life. Chief among these were the demons. Think of them as the mischievous and sometimes downright malevolent counterpoints to the gods. They were the personifications of all the things that went wrong in life: disease, misfortune, accidents, and anything that threatened the well-being of individuals and the community. And two of the most notorious demons you would have encountered, at least in terms of the magical remedies sought to ward them off, were Lamashtu and Namtaru. Lamashtu. Just the name itself probably sends a little shiver down your spine, doesn't it? She was the nightmare of pregnant women and newborns. Picture this. Lamashtu, a creature of terrifying form, often depicted with a combination of a dog's head, a lion's body, and bird's talons. She was said to prey on women during childbirth, to snatch babies from their mother's arms, to suck the blood of infants, and generally cause a terrible amount of distress and death. If you were a pregnant woman or a new mother, Lamashtu would have been a constant, unseen terror. You can imagine the anxiety, the sleepless nights, the constant prayers and protective measures taken to keep this monstrous entity at bay. It wasn't just superstition, it was a deeply ingrained fear, a very real threat in a world where infant mortality was high and medical knowledge was limited. Then there was Namtaru, the plague demon. Namtaru was the bringer of widespread disease, of epidemics that could sweep through a city like wildfire, leaving devastation in its wake. When sickness struck, when a fever raged, or a mysterious ailment took hold, it wasn't just attributed to a natural cause in the way we might think of it today. No, it was far more likely to be the work of Namtaru, or perhaps other malevolent spirits unleashed through Mamatu, which were curses or unfavorable divine decrees. The very concept of disease was steeped in the supernatural. It wasn't just that a germ was attacking your body, it was that a demon or a curse was actively targeting you. This belief system meant that when disaster struck, be it a flood that wiped out crops, an epidemic that decimated a population, or a personal illness that struck you down, people looked for explanations beyond the purely physical. They believed these disasters were caused by curses laid by witches, or by victims committing offenses, sometimes unknowingly against the gods. Perhaps you forgot a crucial ritual, or ate something forbidden, or simply failed to pay proper respect to a particular deity. Even unintentionally ignoring divine signs could invite calamity. The world for them was a place constantly teetering on the edge, where a single misstep could invite the wrath of powerful unseen forces. So how did people protect themselves from these malevolent entities? This is where the magic we're exploring really comes into play. It wasn't enough to simply honor the gods. You had to actively defend yourself against their darker counterparts, or against the consequences of displeasing them. This is where the role of the priests, the exorcists, and the enchanters becomes absolutely critical. They were the frontline defense against the spiritual onslaught. Kings, in particular, needed to guard against these occurrences. Their well-being was tied to the well-being of the entire kingdom. So, they would consult temple priests, especially those who specialized in dealing with these dark forces. Two key figures in this regard were the Aeshipu and the Baru. The Aeshipu were the exorcists, the ones who performed rituals to drive out demons and break curses. They were like the spiritual pest control of ancient Mesopotamia. The Baru, on the other hand, were the diviners, the ones who interpreted omens, who looked to the stars, the entrails of animals, or even the patterns of smoke to understand the will of the gods and to predict what was coming. Both were essential for maintaining stability and protection. The sheer volume of written material dedicated to these matters is staggering. Palace archives, like the legendary library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, were stocked with countless clay cuneiform tablets. These weren't just administrative records. They were meticulously inscribed collections of spells, incantations, prophecies, and omen interpretations. They represent a treasure trove of information about how deeply magic was embedded in the fabric of Mesopotamian life, from the highest levels of royalty to the most ordinary citizens. Ordinary people, too, sought out the services of the Ashipu for protective spells, and relied on amulets and enchanted figurines to keep evil spirits at bay. It was a shared, pervasive system of belief, a testament to humanity's age-old desire to understand and influence the unseen forces that shape our existence. It's a world where the shadow of demons was ever present, but where a robust system of ritual and magic offered a powerful shield. As you stand on this ancient Mesopotamian plain, the memory of those unsettling demons and the anxieties they invoked still lingering, let's turn our attention to the guardians, the ones who stood between the people and the encroaching darkness. And at the very pinnacle of this protective hierarchy, you find the kings. Their well-being was paramount, for the stability of the entire kingdom was believed to rest upon their shoulders, often seen as divinely appointed representatives on earth. Therefore, kings were deeply invested in understanding and mitigating any spiritual threats. So, what did a king do when he felt a chill of unease, a whisper of ill fortune? He wouldn't consult a modern-day psychic or a trend-following astrologer. No, he would turn to the most trusted experts in his court, the keepers of sacred knowledge, the temple priests, and the diviners. These weren't just advisors, they were his spiritual strategists, the ones who could interpret the will of the gods, and crucially, advise on how to avert disaster. Imagine the king, perhaps sitting in a grand hall, the air thick with the scent of incense. He summons his trusted Ashipu, the exorcist. This Ashipu isn't just a fire and brimstone preacher. He's a highly trained ritualist, a master of spells and incantations, someone who understands the intricate ways to banish malevolent entities. He might perform a ritual to cleanse the palace, or perhaps a more targeted spell to counteract a curse that has been detected. His job is to identify the source of spiritual disturbance, and with precise, often complex magical actions, neutralize it. He's the spiritual surgeon, cutting out the infection before it can spread. And then there's the Baru, the diviner. The Baru is the king's early warning system. They're the ones who spend their days, and often nights, poring over omens, meticulously observing the celestial ballet, the flight of birds, the entrails of sacrificed animals, searching for any sign, any subtle indication of what the gods might be planning. If a king is considering a military campaign or a major building project, or even just trying to understand a period of unusual misfortune, he'll turn to the Baru. The Baru will meticulously examine the liver of a sacrificed sheep, looking for anomalies, for patterns that speak of favor or displeasure from the divine. They might also track the movements of the planets, the appearance of comets, or the subtle shifts in atmospheric phenomena, all believed to be messages from the gods. It's a demanding profession, requiring immense knowledge, keen observation, and a deep understanding of symbolic interpretation. These aren't just isolated practices. They were integrated into the very functioning of the state. Palace archives weren't just filled with mundane records of trade and tribute. They were also repositories of immense magical knowledge, vast collections of cuneiform tablets detailing spells, protective rituals, and the intricate art of divination. Think of these libraries as the ancient world's equivalent of a highly classified intelligence agency, filled with the secrets of how to navigate the spiritual and political landscape. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, for example, was renowned for his immense library at Nineveh, which contained tens of thousands of these tablets, covering everything from epic poems to detailed astrological and magical treatises. It underscores how seriously the Mesopotamians took the mastery of these arts, seeing them as essential tools for effective governance and personal protection. So, when you imagine these kings, it's not just about kingship in the sense of wielding a sword or issuing decrees. It's also about the immense responsibility of spiritual stewardship. They were the ultimate beneficiaries of the protective magic and divinatory insights provided by their specialized priests. A king who was seen to be wise, who consulted the right oracles, who performed the correct rituals, was a king who was believed to be favored by the gods, and therefore a king who could bring prosperity and security to his people. It was a symbiotic relationship, a chain of command that extended all the way up to the divine. The king was the earthly embodiment of order, and the priests and diviners were his vital allies in maintaining that order, acting as his shields against the myriad threats, both seen and unseen, that permeated their ancient world. Their practices weren't fringe activities. They were central to the very survival and stability of the kingdom. It was a system built on knowledge, ritual, and an unwavering belief in the power of magic to shape reality. Now, picture yourself as a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps within the very walls of a royal palace. Your task isn't just to record mundane affairs, like grain harvests or tax collections, though those are certainly part of it. Your hands, calloused from years of working with clay and stylus, are carefully pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets. These aren't just records, they are vessels of power, repositories of secrets that could ward off evil, predict the future, and secure the favor of the gods. This is where the magic truly lives, inscribed for eternity, or at least until the clay crumbles. The sheer volume of these tablets is astounding. Imagine walking through endless rows of shelves, each one stacked high with these fired clay rectangles. These were the libraries, the archives of ancient Mesopotamia, and within them resided a vast amount of knowledge, including a substantial collection dedicated to magic. The palace of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, a legendary ruler with a voracious appetite for knowledge, is a prime example. His library wasn't just a collection of stories. It was a meticulously organized repository of spells, incantations, medical texts, astronomical observations, and detailed accounts of omens. It tells us that magic wasn't a hidden underground practice. It was a sophisticated, documented, and highly valued field of study, particularly within royal circles. What exactly were these tablets filled with? Think of it as a highly specialized instruction manual for navigating the spiritual and practical challenges of life. You'd find detailed spells designed to achieve specific outcomes. These could range from protective charms to ward off sickness, to incantations for success in business or love, to more potent curses aimed at enemies. Each spell would have its own set of prescribed rituals, the exact wording of the incantation, the specific ingredients needed, and the precise timing for its performance. Precision was key. A misplaced word or a skipped ingredient could render the entire magical endeavor useless, or worse, backfire spectacularly. Then there were the omen texts. These were the ancient world's version of a crystal ball, albeit one made of clay, and filled with intricate interpretations of natural phenomena. The Baru, the diviners we discussed earlier, relied on these texts to make sense of the messages the gods were sending. Imagine a tablet detailing what it means if a certain bird flies in a particular direction, or if a strange cloud formation appears in the sky, a halo around the sun that might portend the destruction of a city. Irregularities in the movements of the planet Venus, those could signal significant shifts in fortune. Even more unusual portents were meticulously recorded: the birth of deformed animals, conjoined twins, or, as we've touched upon, something as peculiar as a red dog urinating on a man, which, surprisingly, was considered a predictor of happiness. Each observation, no matter how bizarre it might seem to us today, was a clue, a piece of a cosmic puzzle meant to be deciphered. The purpose of these tablets was not just to record knowledge, but to preserve it, to ensure that these vital practices could be passed down through generations of scribes and priests. They were meticulously copied, studied, and preserved, reflecting a deep societal understanding that this magical knowledge was crucial for maintaining order, prosperity, and protection. And it wasn't just the kings and their courts who had access to this knowledge, though the archives were certainly concentrated in royal and temple libraries. Ordinary people, too, would seek out the services of those who possessed this inscribed wisdom. They might commission a scribe to write a specific protective amulet, or consult a diviner who would refer to these ancient texts to interpret their dreams or decipher a troubling omen. The magic, therefore, was not confined to the ivory towers of the palace. It permeated society, accessible through intermediaries and the tangible power of the written word on clay. Think about the sheer dedication involved. The process of creating these tablets, digging the clay, shaping it, drying it, inscribing it with a sharp reed stylus, and then firing it to make it permanent, was labor-intensive. And yet, they did it in vast quantities because the information contained within them was considered invaluable. These tablets were the physical embodiment of their attempts to understand and influence the universe, a tangible link between the mundane and the magical, the human and the divine. As you stand here, surrounded by the silent echoes of these inscribed secrets, you can almost feel the hum of ancient knowledge, a testament to a civilization that placed its faith, its hopes, and its fears onto humble pieces of clay. It's a powerful reminder that even the most ephemeral of beliefs can be given enduring form through the written word. As you continue to wander through the echoing halls and courtyards of this ancient Mesopotamian palace, your gaze might be drawn to something truly monumental, not just impressive, but awe-inspiring. Standing guard at the gateways, flanking the entrances to throne rooms, and anchoring the very corners of these sacred spaces, you see them, the Lamassu. These aren't your average statues. Imagine creatures of immense power and symbolic weight. The head of a human, regal and intelligent, set atop the muscular body of a bull or a lion, and adorned with magnificent, feathered wings. They possess a horned cap, a clear indicator of their divinity, and a sturdy belt, signifying their strength and authority. These Lamassu were more than just decorative elements. They were the ultimate guardians, the celestial border patrol of the palace. Their sheer scale and imposing presence were meant to deter any unwelcome visitors, especially those from the realms below. The thresholds of palaces, the corridors, and the entrances to the throne rooms were considered particularly vulnerable points, places where demons from the underworld, like the aptly named Rabasu, the Crouching One, might try to slip in unnoticed. The Lamassu, with their unblinking, watchful eyes, were positioned to block and support these entrances, creating a powerful spiritual barrier. Their multiple legs, often depicted with 5 to give the impression of movement from both the front and the side, further emphasized their alert, ready-to-act stance. But the protection offered by these magnificent beings wasn't limited to the grand palaces. Even ordinary people understood the importance of warding off evil, and they too employed protective figures, though on a much smaller, more intimate scale. You might find them placing small figurines of gods or hybrid creatures like the fishmen, recognizable by their pointed hats and scaly skins, under their doorways or near their windows. These smaller effigies served a similar purpose, acting as household guardians, a personal defense against the unseen forces that threatened their homes and families. It was a layered approach to protection, with grand, monumental figures safeguarding the seats of power, and humble, personal talismans watching over the common folk. The Lamassu, in particular, were crafted with immense care and imbued with significant magical power. The choice of materials, the intricate detailing, the very act of their creation and placement were all part of a complex ritual. They were believed to possess a potent combination of human intellect, animal strength, and divine authority, making them formidable protectors. Their presence was a constant reminder of the cosmic order that the Mesopotamians strove to maintain, and the lengths they would go to, even in stone, to ensure that order. Think about the sculptor, working diligently on these colossal beings. It wasn't just about artistic skill, it was about channeling spiritual intent. Every chisel stroke, every carefully sculpted feature, was imbued with the purpose of creating a being that could effectively repel demonic influence. The sheer effort involved in quarrying, transporting, and carving these massive blocks of stone speaks volumes about the importance placed on these protective deities. They were the ultimate manifestation of the desire for security, the physical embodiment of the walls that kept the chaotic outside world at bay. And it wasn't just about their physical form. The very act of placing them at thresholds was significant. Thresholds, in many cultures, are liminal spaces, points of transition between different realms, from the outside world to the inside of a home, from the public to the private. For the Mesopotamians, these points of transition were also points of vulnerability. Demons, ever opportunistic, would seek to exploit these weak spots. The Lamassu, therefore, were strategically positioned to intercept any such attempts, their powerful forms acting as an impassable barrier. So, as you stand before these ancient stone sentinels, try to feel their silent, eternal watch. They are not just relics of the past. They are testaments to a profound belief in the power of magic, in the necessity of protection, and in the human drive to create order and security in the face of a mysterious and sometimes frightening world. They are the enduring guardians, the immovable bulwarks against the shadows, standing guard even now, whispering their ancient tales of vigilance and power. While the majestic Lamassu stood sentinel at the grand palaces, and the kings relied on their elite priests and diviners, the everyday magic of Mesopotamia wasn't confined to the hallowed halls of power. It was also very much alive and well in the humble homes of ordinary people. You too would have found ways to protect your own little corner of the world, your own domestic sanctuary, from the unseen forces that loomed beyond your walls. Imagine yourself living in a modest dwelling, perhaps made of sun-dried bricks, a far cry from the stone grandeur of the royal palaces. The world outside your door, while potentially offering sustenance and community, also held its share of dangers, both natural and supernatural. The same demons that threatened the king, Lamashtu, Namtaru, and countless others, were also very much aware of the smaller, perhaps more vulnerable households. So, what did you do? You brought the magic right to your doorstep, in the form of small, potent figurines. These weren't elaborate statues requiring quarrying and immense skill to carve. These were often small, easily crafted items made of clay, bronze, or other readily available materials. You might fashion a small, stylized figure of a protective deity. Perhaps it would be a representation of a god known for healing or protection, like Gula, the goddess often depicted with a dog at her feet. More on her later. Or maybe a more general protective spirit. Alternatively, you might opt for hybrid creatures, beings that combine the attributes of different animals or humans, creating something distinctly powerful and unfamiliar to any lurking evil. Think of those fishmen we mentioned, a common motif, with their pointed hats and scaly skins, suggesting a connection to the watery realms, or perhaps some ancient forgotten wisdom. These small figures, these miniature guardians, would be strategically placed at vulnerable points around your home, under doorways, for instance. Doorways are critical transition zones, aren't they? They lead you from the outside world, with all its uncertainties and potential threats, into the safe haven of your home. Likewise, windows offered another potential point of entry for unwelcome spirits. So, you'd place these little idols there, a silent, unblinking watch. They acted as a kind of mystical doorkeepers, a spiritual welcome mat that warned away any malevolent entities intent on causing harm. The idea was simple, yet profound. By placing these figures in specific locations, you were essentially imbuing those spaces with protective power. It was like putting up a spiritual fence, creating a boundary that the forces of darkness were reluctant or unable to cross. The very presence of these objects, imbued with the intent and the belief of their maker and owner, was enough to deter the less determined spirits. It's a concept that resonates across many cultures and time periods. This idea that certain objects, when consecrated or placed with purpose, can act as shields. These household guardians weren't necessarily part of grand temple rituals or royal decrees. They were personal, intimate expressions of faith and self-preservation. They represented the individual's agency in the face of the overwhelming forces of the cosmos. It was about taking matters into your own hands, about actively participating in your own protection. You might have crafted one yourself, pouring your hopes and fears into its creation, or perhaps acquired it from a local craftsman or a traveling vendor, believing it held a specific potent charm. The choice of what to place where would have been informed by a blend of tradition, personal experience, and the specific anxieties of the time. If there was a particular illness circulating, you might place a figurine associated with healing. If you were particularly concerned about nightmares or disruptive spirits, you'd choose something designed to combat those. It was a practical, adaptable form of magic, woven into the very fabric of daily life. So as you stand here, in the imagined quiet of a Mesopotamian home, imagine these small, silent guardians. They might seem insignificant compared to the colossal Lamassu, but their importance to the people who placed them there would have been immense. They represented hope, security, and the enduring human belief that even in the face of the unknown, there were ways to create a little bit of safety, a little bit of peace, right at your own doorstep. It's a gentle reminder that magic, in its most fundamental form, is often about the simple, heartfelt desire for protection and well-being. You've seen the grand protectors, the household charms, and the looming presence of demons. Now, let's zoom in on a truly fascinating character in the Mesopotamian magical landscape, the Aeshipu. We've touched upon them as exorcists, the spiritual bouncers of this ancient world, tasked with kicking out troublesome spirits. But their role was often far more nuanced, far more integrated into the very fabric of daily life, especially when it came to health. Picture yourself feeling unwell. Perhaps you have a fever, a persistent cough, or a strange ailment that defies easy explanation. In your time, the line between medicine and magic was incredibly blurred, almost non-existent. If you were to seek help, you wouldn't necessarily go to a separate doctor and a separate magician. Often, those roles were combined, and the Aeshipu was frequently at the forefront of this combined approach. Why? Because, as we've discussed, disease and suffering were often attributed to supernatural causes. A persistent illness wasn't just a biological malfunction. It was often seen as a demon invading the body, or a curse affecting the spirit. Therefore, to cure the ailment, you had to address the spiritual cause. And who better to do that than the Aeshipu, the master of spiritual warfare? Imagine the Aeshipu arriving at your bedside. They wouldn't just prescribe a pill or offer a diagnosis based on observable symptoms. Instead, they would begin by trying to identify the culprit. Was it a specific demon, like the dreaded Lamashtu, causing trouble? Or was it a curse from a vengeful sorcerer? Or perhaps an offense committed, perhaps unknowingly, against a god? The Ishipu would likely engage in a form of spiritual investigation, perhaps by asking targeted questions, observing your symptoms for any clues that pointed to a particular supernatural agent. Once the cause was identified, the Ishipu would then employ their arsenal of magical techniques. This would involve a variety of spells and incantations. For instance, they might invoke the name of Gula, the goddess of health. Gula was often depicted with a dog at her feet, and dogs themselves were considered sacred to her, associated with healing and protection. So the Ishipu might recite prayers, calling upon Gula's power to drive out the malevolent spirit or curse that was making you ill. They might use amulets, perhaps crafted with specific symbols or materials known to repel certain types of spirits, and place them on your afflicted body. One common practice involved using substitution magic. Imagine a scenario where a younger, healthier animal, like a goat, might be dressed in the clothes and sandals of the sick person. This goat would then be sacrificed to a deity associated with death or disease, in the hope that the goddess would accept the goat as a substitute, taking its life instead of the patient's. It's a rather grim, yet remarkably practical application of magical thinking, a way of appeasing the forces of destruction with an acceptable offering. The Ishipu might also employ ritual purification, perhaps using specific herbs or waters to cleanse the body and spirit of any lingering impurities that could attract negative influences. Their methods were diverse, practical, and deeply rooted in the belief that the spiritual and physical realms were inextricably linked. They understood that to heal the body, you often had to first heal the spirit, or at least banish the spiritual afflictions that were causing the physical distress. It's important to remember that while we categorize them as exorcists, their function often extended beyond simply banishing demons. They were the frontline responders to suffering, wielding both spiritual and practical knowledge. They were the healers of their time, and their healing often involved the direct manipulation of what we would call supernatural forces. They were the bridge between the divine will, the actions of spirits, and the physical well-being of the individual. Their presence in a sick room wouldn't have been a sign of last resort. It would have been the primary and most respected course of action, a testament to their vital role in Mesopotamian society, not just as spiritual warriors, but as skilled, albeit magically inclined healers. It was a world where the power to heal was intimately intertwined with the power to understand and combat the unseen. As you continue to explore the intricate tapestry of Mesopotamian magic, you'll encounter a particularly fascinating aspect: the active and often fiery resistance against witchcraft and curses. In a world where personal misfortune was frequently blamed on the malevolent intentions of others, particularly witches, the need for effective counter-magic was paramount, and this is where the Maklu tablets come into play, a crucial collection of rituals designed for exactly this purpose. Imagine you've been told, or you strongly suspect, that a witch has been targeting you. Perhaps your crops have failed inexplicably, you've fallen gravely ill, or a series of unfortunate events has befallen your household. In ancient Mesopotamia, such persistent bad luck wasn't always seen as random chance. It was often attributed to the deliberate, malicious actions of witches, individuals who supposedly wielded dark magic for their own nefarious ends. These witches, it was believed, could secretly place curses upon people, weaving spells of misfortune from the shadows. To combat this insidious threat, priests, particularly the Ishipu, our ever-versatile exorcists, developed a comprehensive set of rituals. These were meticulously documented in a series of 9 clay tablets known as the Maklu series, meaning burning in the ancient Akkadian language. The first compilation of these tablets dates back to around 1600 BCE, and they were passed down and utilized by Ishipu for approximately the next 1,000 years. That's 1,000 years of people saying, "Nope, not today, witch." Across 8 of these tablets, you'd find a remarkable collection of 100 incantations. These weren't just random rhymes, they were powerful formulas, carefully crafted to identify, understand, and ultimately neutralize evil magic. Think of them as a magical detective kit, providing the Ishipu with the tools to pinpoint the source of the curse and to weaken its hold. They were the ancient world's way of saying, "We see you, evil magic, and we have a plan." But the real climax, the most potent part of the Maklu ritual, comes in the final tablet. This tablet provides instructions for a specific and rather dramatic ceremony to banish a curse. And what does this ceremony involve? Burning. Specifically, burning a figurine that represents the witch responsible for the curse. Imagine the scene: an Aeshipu, perhaps in a ritual chamber, holding a clay figurine that has been meticulously crafted to resemble the offending witch. The figurine might be inscribed with her name, or perhaps with symbols associated with her. Around it, the Aeshipu would recite the powerful incantations from the earlier tablets, channeling protective energies and calling upon the gods, perhaps even Gula, the goddess of health, to lend their aid. Then, with deliberate intent, the figurine is cast into a fire. This act of burning is symbolic, of course, but the symbolism is incredibly potent. It's a ritualistic destruction of the witch's power, a visual representation of her curse being consumed by the purifying flames. It's a way of severing the magical link between the witch and her victim, of breaking the hold of the curse and sending it back, perhaps, to its origin. The fire acts as a cleanser, a destroyer of malevolent forces. It's a powerful expression of human agency, a forceful rejection of the influence that sought to bring harm. The Aeshipu often doubled as doctors, remember. So within these very tablets, you might also find spells aimed at healing, such as one that calls upon Gula to drive out a ghost that is making a patient ill. This demonstrates how seamlessly the concepts of physical and spiritual well-being were integrated. To heal the body, you first had to address the spiritual causes of illness, and that often involved directly confronting and neutralizing harmful magic. The Maklu tablets, with their emphasis on identifying and destroying the source of evil magic, were a vital part of this holistic approach to health and protection. They represent a proactive stance against the perceived supernatural threats, a testament to the ingenuity and the deeply ingrained belief in the power of ritual to shape reality. It's a reminder that even in the face of unseen adversaries, humanity has always sought powerful ways to fight back and reclaim their peace. As the ritual fires of counter-magic flicker and fade in your mind, let's turn our attention to another crucial figure in the Mesopotamian world of magic, the Baru, the diviner. These individuals were the celestial interpreters, the ones who meticulously studied the heavens and the earth for signs, for messages from the gods that would illuminate the path ahead and warn of impending dangers. In a society deeply reliant on understanding divine will, the Baru held a position of immense importance. Imagine the Baru, perhaps a learned individual, with keen eyes and a mind trained to perceive patterns where others saw only chaos. Their work wasn't about casual stargazing. It was a highly disciplined and systematic art, rooted in a profound belief that the cosmos itself was a language, a medium through which the gods communicated with humanity. Their tools weren't crystal balls, but rather the very fabric of the universe, the movements of celestial bodies, the patterns of animal entrails, the configurations of smoke and fire. One of their primary methods involved ecstipsy. This might sound a bit messy, and it was, It involved the meticulous examination of the entrails of sacrificial animals, typically sheep. After a ritual sacrifice, the Baru would carefully lay out the freshly removed organs, particularly the liver, which was considered the most significant. They would scrutinize its size, shape, color, texture, and any unusual markings or lesions. Each detail was potentially a message from the divine. A perfect liver might signify divine favor, while an anomaly, a hole, an unusual coloration, a strange texture could portend disaster or divine displeasure. This wasn't just a gruesome task, it was a sacred duty requiring deep knowledge of anatomy and an extensive library of previously recorded observations and their interpretations. But their gaze wasn't limited to the earthbound. The heavens held an even more compelling and perhaps more powerful source of divine communication. The Baru were keen observers of celestial phenomena. Think of them, perhaps on a clear night, charting the courses of the stars and planets. A solar eclipse, for instance, was never just a scientific curiosity. It was a potent omen, often interpreted as a sign that portended the destruction of a city or a significant upheaval. The appearance of halos around the sun or moon, those ethereal rings of light, also carried meaning, often signaling impending doom. They paid close attention to the movements of planets, particularly Venus, whose appearances and disappearances in the night sky were carefully tracked. Irregularities in its celestial dance could be interpreted as signs of divine intervention or shifts in fortune. Even the subtle changes in cloud conditions, the patterns of lightning, or the direction of the wind could be considered meaningful, offering clues to the gods' intentions. This practice wasn't merely about passive observation, it was about active interpretation. The Baru had developed a complex system of symbols and meanings, a kind of celestial lexicon to decipher these messages. They understood that the universe was speaking, and their role was to translate that divine language into actionable advice for kings, priests, and the wider community. It was a constant endeavor to align human actions with what was believed to be the preordained, or at least influenced, course of events. The sheer dedication required for this work is remarkable. Imagine the patience, the meticulous record-keeping, the years of study needed to become proficient in interpreting these subtle, often cryptic signs. The Baru were the intellectuals and the spiritual guides of their time, providing a sense of order and predictability in a world that was otherwise fraught with uncertainty. Their pronouncements, often delivered with an air of solemn authority, could influence decisions ranging from the king's choice of battle plans to the timing of planting crops. And while much of this was serious and focused on serious matters, there was also an element of the uncanny, the truly peculiar. The text mentions that even the birth of deformed animals or conjoined twins was considered a portent. And then there's the rather amusing example of a red dog urinating on a man being seen as a predictor of happiness. It's a reminder that ancient divination wasn't always grim. It embraced the full spectrum of human experience, finding meaning in the mundane and the extraordinary alike. It was a world where every ripple in the cosmic pond, every anomaly in the natural order, could be a divine whisper, and the Baru were the ones tuned in to hear it. They were the essential navigators of fate, guiding their people through the often turbulent waters of existence with the wisdom gleaned from the heavens and the earth. As you continue to absorb the practices of the Mesopotamian Baru, the diviners, you might find yourself chuckling at some of the more unusual omens they meticulously recorded. While many of their interpretations focused on grand celestial events or the predictable patterns within animal entrails, the divinatory world was also populated by the wonderfully odd, the strangely specific, and the downright quirky. It's a testament to the human mind's relentless drive to find meaning, even in the most unexpected places. We've already touched upon some of these, but let's really savor them for a moment. Picture a king or a nobleman consulting a baru about the future. The diviner, after examining a particularly auspicious sheep's liver, might then report on more peculiar occurrences they'd observed or heard about. For instance, the birth of deformed animals. This wasn't just a biological oddity, it was seen as a potent message from the divine. A calf born with 2 heads, a lamb with extra limbs, or perhaps a bird with an unusually twisted beak. These were not dismissed as genetic anomalies. Instead, they were interpreted as signs, portents that carried significant meaning, though the exact interpretation could be as complex as deciphering a coded message. Was it a warning, a blessing, a commentary on the current state of affairs? The baru would consult their extensive records, their accumulated wisdom, to decipher these unusual deliveries from the cosmos. And then there were the omens derived from human births, conjoined twins, a phenomenon that often evokes wonder and sometimes fear even today, were particularly noteworthy in ancient Mesopotamia. Such births were carefully observed, their appearance a significant indicator of divine intention. Imagine the hushed discussions, the consultations with scribes and diviners, as they tried to understand what this remarkable event signified for the kingdom or for the individuals involved. Was it a sign of extraordinary destiny, or a warning of unusual challenges ahead? But perhaps the most delightfully specific, and frankly rather amusing, omen mentioned is the one concerning a red dog urinating on a man. Now, let's break that down. Not just any dog, but a red dog. Not just any action, but urination. And not just anywhere, but specifically on a man. And the interpretation: happiness. Yes, you heard that right. This rather bizarre and frankly embarrassing scenario was considered a positive sign, a harbinger of good fortune. You can almost picture the scene. A man walking along, a red dog ambles by, does its business, and he strides away with a knowing smile, thinking, "Ah, the gods smile upon me. My day of joy is upon us." It's a delightful example of how deeply the Mesopotamians believed the divine communicated through the most mundane, and indeed, sometimes the most peculiar of circumstances. These peculiar portents highlight a key aspect of Mesopotamian divination: the belief in the interconnectedness of all things. Nothing happened in isolation. Every event, no matter how small or strange, was seen as potentially part of a larger divine plan, a piece of a cosmic puzzle that, if correctly interpreted, could offer guidance and protection. The diviners, therefore, had to be observant of everything, from the grand sweep of the constellations to the most fleeting, unusual event on Earth. It also speaks to a certain pragmatism, perhaps even a sense of humor, in their approach to understanding the divine. While they took their rituals and their interpretations very seriously, there was also an acknowledgement that the gods' messages could be conveyed in unexpected and even amusing ways. It's a reminder that even in the most ancient and seemingly solemn of belief systems, there's room for the wonderfully strange. These peculiar portents, while perhaps baffling to us now, were vital threads in the rich tapestry of Mesopotamian magical and spiritual life, providing comfort, guidance, and a sense of order in a world that was often unpredictable and brimming with mystery. They were the eccentric footnotes in the grand book of divine communication, and they offer us a delightful peek into the unique worldview of these ancient people. As our journey through Mesopotamian magic continues, we'll encounter a fascinating evolution in the practice, particularly in its later stages. While the grand palaces had their lamassu and the kings consulted elaborate omen texts, the common people also developed their own unique and often ingenious ways to harness magical protection. And here we encounter the humble yet incredibly potent incantation bowl. Picture this. You're living in Mesopotamia during the later period, perhaps between the 5th and 7th century CE, a time when the cultural influences had mingled and evolved. You're worried about something, maybe a specific demon, or a general sense of unease in your home, or perhaps the dreaded evil eye casting its malevolent gaze upon you. You need protection, and you need it now, in a way that's both accessible and effective. Enter the Incantation Bowl. These bowls, often made of earthenware or clay, were more than just simple vessels for food or drink. They were meticulously crafted, and importantly, they were inscribed with spells, or incantations, written in Aramaic, the common language of the time in many parts of the region. These weren't just decorative scribbles, they were carefully chosen words of power, designed to invoke protection, to bind spirits, or to ward off evil. Imagine the bowl being turned on a potter's wheel, and as it takes shape, a scribe or a magician carefully inscribes the protective words along its inner surface, often in a spiral pattern that moved inwards towards the center. And what often adorned the center of these bowls? A depiction of a demon. Now this might seem counterintuitive, right? Why draw a picture of the very thing you're trying to ward off? Well, the logic here is a bit like how you might taunt a bully to show you're not afraid, or how a scary mask might be used to scare away spirits. By depicting the demon in the center of the bowl, often in a stylized, somewhat grotesque form, the bowl itself becomes a trap, a visual containment. The demon, drawn and trapped within the confines of the inscribed magical words, is rendered powerless, unable to affect the household it's meant to protect. It's as if the bowl itself is a magical prison, with the incantations acting as the unbreakable bars. The effectiveness of these bowls was amplified by the way they were used. They were typically buried, usually at the corners of rooms, or sometimes placed under thresholds or in other significant locations within the house. The idea behind burying them was to create a kind of magical perimeter, a protective network that enveloped the entire dwelling. Imagine the ritual. You dig a shallow hole in the corner of your main living space, place the bowl carefully inside, inscribed side down, and then cover it with earth. This act was believed to anchor the magical power of the bowl firmly into the foundation of your home, creating an invisible shield against malevolent forces. This practice offers a powerful insight into the Mesopotamian belief that objects themselves possessed an inherent animate quality, a capacity to act as receptacles of enormous magical power. It wasn't just the words or the depictions, but the material itself, combined with the intention and the ritual placement, that gave these bowls their potency. They were imbued with the belief that they could actively help to ward off evil spirits, thwart their actions, and if necessary, gain the favor of a god that was needed to drive them away. The longevity of this tradition, extending to the 5th-7th century CE, speaks to its deep-rooted effectiveness and widespread acceptance. Even as empires rose and fell, and different cultures and languages came and went, the fundamental need for protection and the belief in the power of these inscribed objects persisted. These bowls represent a beautiful blend of practicality and profound spiritual belief. They were accessible, effective, and deeply personal forms of magic, carried out by ordinary people seeking to create a safer, more secure existence for themselves and their families. As you contemplate these silent, earthbound guardians, you can almost feel the quiet hope and resilience they represent, a persistent echo of ancient wishes for peace and safety, buried deep within the very foundations of their homes. Continuing our exploration of Mesopotamian magic, we encounter a fascinating principle that underpinned many of their protective and healing rituals: the concept of substitution. It's a rather ingenious idea, really, The notion that you could divert misfortune, illness, or even death from yourself or a loved one by offering something else in their stead, a kind of magical scapegoat. Think of it as a cosmic insurance policy, where you pay a less costly premium to avoid a catastrophic loss. Imagine you are suffering from a severe illness, or perhaps a loved one is on the brink of death. In a world where supernatural forces were believed to be directly responsible for such calamities, simply praying for recovery might not feel like enough. You might need to actively bargain with the powers that be. This is where the principle of substitution came into play. The idea was to offer a substitute, an acceptable offering, to the deity or spirit who held the power over life and death, or who was believed to be causing the affliction. The most vivid example we have of this principle is the ritual involving a young goat. Picture this: a sick man, weakened and vulnerable, lies in his bed. The Ashipu, the exorcist and healer, orchestrates a ritual. A young healthy goat is brought into the sick man's presence. This isn't just any goat. It's chosen for its vitality, its innocence, its very life force. The goat is then dressed in the sick man's clothes, perhaps even given his sandals. It's adorned with the trappings of the human life it is about to represent. Then, this stand-in, this surrogate life, is presented as an offering. It is sacrificed, not necessarily to the god of death, but perhaps to the goddess of health, or a deity who has the power to avert the specific illness. The logic is elegantly grim. The goddess, receiving this perfect, unblemished substitute, would be appeased. She would take the life of the goat, believing it to be the intended victim, and in doing so, would spare the life of the actual sick man. It's a transference of fate, a magical redirection of destiny. The goat carries away the illness, the curse, or even the impending death, leaving the original victim unharmed, at least in theory. This isn't just about a single, isolated ritual. The principle of substitution permeated various aspects of Mesopotamian magic and religious practice. It speaks to a sophisticated understanding of how to engage with the divine, a recognition that sometimes a direct appeal wasn't enough. You had to offer something tangible, something of value, to demonstrate your earnestness and to secure the desired outcome. The effectiveness of these rituals likely stemmed not only from the belief system itself, but also from the psychological impact. For the afflicted and their families, actively participating in such a ritual would have offered a sense of control, a feeling of doing something concrete to combat the overwhelming forces of illness and death. It provided hope, a tangible action in the face of helplessness. Consider the materials used in other magical practices, like the clay figurines we've discussed. While their primary purpose was often to represent an enemy or a spirit for binding or banishment, one could also imagine them being used in a sacrificial context, though perhaps not always for life substitution. Their destruction, too, was a form of diverting negative energy or effects. The principle of substitution is a powerful illustration of how ancient peoples sought to actively manage their relationship with the divine and the supernatural. It shows a deep understanding of cause and effect, albeit viewed through a magical lens. It was a way to negotiate with fate, to appease powerful forces, and to ensure the continuation of life and health through carefully orchestrated acts of magical exchange. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity has always found ways to adapt, to strategize, and to seek a measure of control, even if that control was achieved through the symbolic sacrifice of an innocent goat. It's a practice that, while perhaps unsettling by modern standards, reveals a profound and often poignant ingenuity in their quest for survival and well-being. As we continue to navigate the ancient world of Mesopotamian magic, we encounter a particularly sensitive and deeply ingrained aspect of their belief system, the complex relationship with the spirits of the dead. While the living focused on warding off demons and appeasing gods, they also had a profound respect, and indeed a fear, of those who had passed on. This respect, combined with a lingering apprehension, led to the development of specific magical practices aimed at ensuring the peaceful passage and continued silence of the deceased. You see, the Mesopotamians believed that the dead, if not properly handled, could become troublesome. The journey to the underworld, a dark and shadowy realm, was fraught with peril, and it was thought that the spirits of the departed might linger, seeking to interact with the living in ways that could be disruptive or even harmful. The ultimate goal, therefore, was to ensure that these spirits remained in their designated realm, silent and undisturbed, and that the living were protected from any unwanted spiritual interference. This is where the creation of ghost effigies, or representations of the deceased, comes into play. Imagine you are creating a small clay figure. This figure isn't intended to be a beloved memento or a way to remember a departed loved one with fondness. Instead, its purpose is much more practical and, frankly, a bit grim. You would carefully inscribe the name of the deceased person onto this clay figure. The act of inscribing the name was crucial. It was believed to bind the spirit to the effigy, creating a physical anchor for its ethereal essence. But the effigy's purpose wasn't just to have the spirit's name on it. To further ensure the spirit's passivity and silence, specific actions were taken. The figure's feet would be broken. This was a symbolic act of preventing the spirit from wandering, from moving about, and potentially disturbing the living. If the spirit couldn't walk, it couldn't come back to haunt the places it once knew. And then, to ensure its silence, to prevent it from speaking, from whispering curses or warnings, or simply making its presence known, a dog's tooth would be placed in the effigy's mouth. The dog, often associated with the underworld and with guarding sacred spaces, might have been seen as a symbol of silencing or overpowering malevolent forces. Putting a dog's tooth in the mouth of the effigy was a magical act designed to gag the spirit, to ensure that its voice, its influence, remained confined to the realm of the dead. These practices weren't just about personal superstition. They were deeply integrated into funerary rites and ongoing rituals for the deceased. It was a way of managing the dead, of ensuring that the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the departed remained clear and respected. You might imagine these effigies being buried alongside the deceased, or perhaps placed in specific locations within the home, as a constant, albeit silent, reminder of the precautions taken. The very existence of such practices highlights a fundamental aspect of Mesopotamian magical thinking: the belief that the unseen world was populated by forces that needed to be actively managed, appeased, or controlled. The dead, in this context, were not simply gone. They were a presence that required careful handling to maintain the delicate balance of existence. These rituals, while perhaps unsettling in their directness, were born out of a desire for order and peace. They were a way of acknowledging the power of the departed, while simultaneously creating a protective barrier against any potential disruptions. It's a fascinating glimpse into the complex anxieties and the sophisticated magical solutions that the Mesopotamians employed to navigate the mysteries of life, death, and the enduring presence of the spirit world. They were, in essence, a way of ensuring that the silence of the grave was maintained and that the living could continue their lives undisturbed by the echoes of the past. As we continue to delve into the magical practices of Mesopotamia, we uncover a crucial aspect of their beliefs: the understanding that even the most potent magic often required the intervention, or at least the permission, of the gods. It wasn't enough to simply perform a ritual. You had to ensure that the right divine powers were aligned with your cause. And when it came to countering the insidious effects of witchcraft and curses, the Mesopotamians often found themselves appealing to the highest authorities, particularly the god Marduk and his equally powerful father, Enki. You see, the prevailing belief was that many instances of evil magic were carried out not through the witch's own inherent power alone, but through her ability to trick or manipulate the gods into helping her. Imagine a sorceress, desperate to harm her enemy. She wouldn't necessarily storm the heavens herself. Instead, she might employ cunning prayers and offerings, attempting to persuade a deity to act on her behalf, to direct their divine power towards her victim. It was a form of spiritual manipulation, an attempt to leverage divine authority for personal gain. This is where the appeals to Marduk become particularly significant. Marduk was a prominent Babylonian god, often associated with magic, wisdom, and order. He was seen as a powerful intermediary, a deity who understood the intricacies of the cosmic balance. When faced with the consequences of witchcraft, the curses, the diseases, the misfortunes that were believed to be divinely sanctioned due to a witch's manipulation, people would turn to Marduk. Their prayers would often be directed not just to Marduk himself, but also as a plea for him to intercede with his father Enki. Enki, also known as Ea in Assyrian traditions, was the ultimate source of much of the ritual magic and wisdom in Mesopotamia. He was the god of the abyss, of fresh water, and of magic itself. The Ashipu, the exorcists who performed these complex rituals, relied on the foundational knowledge and power that flowed from Enki. So, when an Ashipu or a supplicant sought to break a curse or expel a demon that had been sent through a witch's cunning pleas, they would implore Marduk to act as their advocate, to present their case to Enki, and to tap into that ultimate source of ritualistic power to counteract the evil. Imagine the prayer, O mighty Marduk, you who understand the ways of the gods and the machinations of mortals, hear my plea. A witch has woven a web of misfortune around me, tricking the gods into unleashing their power against me. I beg you, speak to your father, the wise Enki, the master of all rituals. Ask him to lend his power, to break these chains of magic, and to restore the balance that has been so cruelly disrupted. It was a chain of divine appeals, each layer invoking greater power and authority to undo the damage caused by human malice and divine manipulation. This reliance on divine mediation highlights a key aspect of Mesopotamian magical practice. It was rarely an isolated act. It was woven into a complex relationship with the divine realm. Even when performing a ritual to banish a demon or break a curse, the practitioners understood that ultimate power resided with the gods. Their role was to act as conduits, to channel divine energy, or to persuade the gods to act. The fear of witches manipulating the gods also underscores the importance of maintaining good relationships with the divine powers. A strong connection with the gods, demonstrated through proper worship and adherence to rituals, was seen as a form of protection in itself. It meant that the gods would be less likely to be swayed by the whispers of witches against you. So when you think about Mesopotamian magic, remember this interconnectedness. It wasn't just about spells and amulets. It was about navigating a vast spiritual ecosystem. It was about understanding who held the power, how to appeal to them, and how to enlist their aid in the ongoing struggle against forces that sought to disrupt the order of the world. The appeals to Marduk and Enki were not just prayers. They were strategic invocations, essential steps in the complex and often perilous art of magic. They were the ultimate recourse, the way to ensure that even the most potent of curses could be unraveled by the combined might of divine wisdom and celestial intervention. As we've seen, the Mesopotamian world was brimming with unseen forces, both benevolent and malevolent. While the grand guardians and the intricate rituals offered protection, a more personal, portable form of magic was also incredibly popular: the amulet. These weren't just decorative trinkets, they were potent talismans, believed to carry significant magical power, and often their very design was a direct challenge to the forces they were meant to repel. Imagine yourself preparing for a journey, perhaps through dangerous desert territories known to be inhabited by demons, or perhaps just a normal day in a city prone to epidemics. You'd reach for a specific amulet, a small object worn close to the body, imbued with the power to ward off evil. The materials varied: stone, metal, clay, but the intent was always the same: protection. And here's where it gets truly fascinating. These amulets often depicted the very spirits they were designed to ward off. It might sound a little paradoxical, like inviting the wolf into the sheepfold, but the logic was deeply rooted in magical principles. By depicting a demon, by giving it a visual form and inscribing its name, you were essentially confronting it, neutralizing its power, and sometimes even co-opting its own fearsome attributes for your defense. Take, for example, Pazuzu, the king of the wind demons. Pazuzu was a particularly nasty character, associated with famine and locust plagues, beings that could sweep across the land and devastate livelihoods. When depicted on an amulet, Pazuzu was often shown as a terrifying creature in his own right, a being with a bird's chest and sharp talons, perhaps even holding a thunderbolt, a symbol of raw power. The idea behind wearing an amulet depicting Pazuzu was twofold. Firstly, it was a display of defiance, showing that you were not intimidated by this fearsome entity. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, by portraying Pazuzu, you were believed to be able to harness his own fearsome nature to drive away another, perhaps even more dangerous demon. It was a bit like using a guard dog to scare off a burglar. Then there was Lamashtu, the demoness who preyed on women and children. We've encountered her before, the hybrid creature with the head of a dog, the body of a lion, and the talons of a bird. Amulets featuring Lamashtu were crafted to be particularly effective in protecting pregnant women and infants, the very targets of her malicious intent. The image of Lamashtu, rendered on a protective plaque, served as a powerful deterrent. It was a visual manifestation of the protective forces arrayed against her, a magical barrier designed to reflect her own malevolence back at her. These amulets weren't just passive symbols, they were active agents of magic. They were imbued with the belief that their form, their material, and the very act of wearing them could influence the spiritual world. They were talismans that could protect a traveler in hostile territory, or keep disease away from a house during an epidemic. In the unpredictable world of Mesopotamia, where life could be precarious and the forces of chaos always seemed to be lurking, these amulets represented a tangible way to tilt the balance, just a little in people's favor. The craftsmanship involved in creating these amulets also speaks to their significance. They were often intricately detailed, reflecting a deep understanding of the symbolism associated with each demon and the protective powers sought. They were the personal armor of the ancient Mesopotamian, a constant, reassuring presence against the unseen threats that pervaded their lives. It's a beautiful reminder of how art and belief, form and function, were so seamlessly interwoven in their magical practices, creating objects of power that offered solace and security in a world often governed by fear. These small, wearable pieces of magic were, in their own quiet way, some of the most potent tools in the Mesopotamian arsenal against the darkness. Continuing our exploration of these powerful, personal charms, let's consider the practical application of amulets in the daily lives of Mesopotamians. We've seen how they depicted demons to ward them off, but their protective reach extended to specific situations, to times when individuals felt particularly vulnerable. Think of it as specialized magical gear, designed for particular missions. One of the most common scenarios where amulets would be indispensable was during travel. The world outside the safety of your city or village could be a dangerous place. You might be venturing into unfamiliar territories, perhaps through the vast, scorching deserts that bordered Mesopotamia, or across treacherous mountain passes. These were not just landscapes, they were often perceived as realms teeming with spirits and demons, places where unwary travelers could easily fall prey to supernatural threats. Imagine you are a merchant, preparing for a long journey with valuable goods. You'd want every possible advantage, and a carefully chosen amulet would be your constant companion. It might be an amulet depicting a powerful protective deity, or perhaps a specific demon known to haunt such regions, worn to either deter it or to harness its power to scare off others. The amulet was a small but potent reminder that you were not alone, that you carried with you a shield against the dangers that lay ahead. It was a tangible piece of faith, a whispered promise of safe passage in a world where the next step could lead into the unknown. And then there were those periods when disease swept through the land, when the invisible threat of an epidemic loomed large. In such times, the fear of contagion was palpable, and people sought any means possible to protect themselves and their households. This is where amulets took on an even more critical role. Imagine a city gripped by a fever that spread from house to house, with the ever-present threat of Namtaru, the plague demon, working his havoc. In such circumstances, the amulets worn by individuals, and perhaps even placed within the home itself, were seen as vital defenses. They were a way to create a personal bubble of protection, a magical barrier that could, hopefully, prevent the encroaching illness from taking hold. The belief was that these amulets, by invoking the power of specific deities, or by symbolically confronting malevolent spirits, could actively repel the agents of disease. It was a proactive measure, a way of taking control, however small, in the face of an overwhelming and often invisible enemy. You might wear an amulet depicting Gula, the goddess of healing, hoping she would extend her restorative powers to you. Or perhaps you'd use an amulet that specifically targeted the spirits believed to cause illness, effectively banishing them from your vicinity. These amulets weren't just about grand gestures. They were about the quiet, persistent need for security in the face of everyday anxieties and extraordinary crises. They were the personal armor of the Mesopotamian, a tangible manifestation of their hopes for well-being and their deep-seated understanding of the magical forces at play in their world. In a land where so much was unpredictable, the amulet offered a small, constant reassurance, a whispered promise of protection in a world that often felt precarious. They were the little shields against the vast unknown, a testament to the enduring human spirit's quest for safety and peace. As our journey through the magical practices of ancient Mesopotamia draws to a close, it's time to pause and reflect on the overarching philosophy that underpinned all these rituals, amulets, and incantations. You've witnessed the elaborate defenses against demons, the careful interpretations of omens, the appeals to powerful deities, and the personal charms worn for protection. What emerges from this rich tapestry is a profound understanding of the human condition in an often chaotic and unpredictable world. The Mesopotamians lived in a land blessed by its rivers. but also constantly threatened by their volatile nature. They witnessed the devastating power of floods, the fury of storms, and the silent creep of disease. Their lives were shaped by forces far beyond their immediate control, from the cycles of the seasons to the inscrutable will of the gods. In the face of such overwhelming power, it's only natural that they would seek ways to find a sense of order, a degree of control, and a flicker of hope. Magic, in its myriad forms, served as this vital bridge. It was not merely superstition, though it certainly involved beliefs that differ from our modern scientific understanding. Rather, it was a sophisticated system of thought and practice designed to actively engage with the perceived forces that shaped their reality. When life felt like a precarious balancing act, with the scales heavily tipped towards misfortune, magic offered a way to actively try and rebalance them. Think of it as a constant negotiation. You honored the gods to gain their favor. You performed rituals to appease them, and you used magic to ward off the negative influences that could disrupt the cosmic harmony. The Aeshipu acting as a healer, the Baru deciphering celestial whispers, the small figurines placed at doorways, all these were actions taken to influence the outcome, to tip the scales just a little bit in their favor. It was about actively participating in one's own destiny, rather than passively accepting whatever fate might throw at them. The very act of performing a ritual, of reciting an incantation, of crafting an amulet, was an expression of agency. It was a declaration that, despite the overwhelming power of the universe, humanity could still exert some influence, could still fight back against the forces of chaos and destruction. It provided a sense of empowerment, a feeling that one wasn't entirely at the mercy of fate. Furthermore, these practices fostered a sense of community and shared understanding. When a whole city or a household engaged in rituals or relied on specific protective measures, it created a collective bond, a shared belief system that reinforced their sense of identity and security. The magic wasn't just individual, it was communal, a joint effort to maintain a stable and prosperous existence. So as you find yourself in this ancient Mesopotamian landscape, remember that the magic you've encountered wasn't born out of idle curiosity or a desire for spectacle. It was born out of necessity, out of a deep-seated human need to understand the world, to find meaning in its complexities, and to actively seek balance and well-being in the face of life's inherent unpredictability. It was their way of making sense of the cosmos, of finding comfort in the face of fear, and of pursuing a life filled with as much order and protection as they could possibly muster. It's this enduring human spirit, this drive to find hope and balance, that truly resonates through these ancient practices. And so, as the last echoes of ancient Mesopotamian rituals fade, and the starlight, so ancient and vast, gently illuminates this timeless landscape, we find ourselves at the quiet edge of a profound journey. You've walked with the people of the two rivers, glimpsed their fervent hopes, their deep-seated fears, and the ingenious ways they sought to navigate the intricate dance between the human and the divine, the seen and the unseen. From the monumental stone sentinels of the Lamassu, standing eternal watch, to the humble clay figures nestled by a threshold, a silent promise of protection, you've seen how magic was not an abstract concept, but a vital living force woven into the very fabric of daily existence. You've imagined the hushed tones of the Ashipu calling upon ancient goddesses to expel the shadows of illness, and the meticulous gaze of the Baru reading the secrets whispered by the stars. You felt the potent symbolism of the burning figurines, a fiery rejection of malicious curses, and the quiet power contained within inscribed bowls, buried deep to safeguard hearth and home. You've understood that even the most peculiar of omens, a red dog's unusual offering or the birth of a conjoined twin, held weight and meaning in their quest to decipher the will of the gods and maintain a fragile cosmic balance. You've seen how the principle of substitution offered a tangible way to divert misfortune, a spiritual lifeline cast in times of desperate need. And you've come to appreciate how these practices, from the grandest state-sponsored rituals to the most personal protective amulets, were all driven by the same fundamental human impulse, the deep-seated desire for order, for security, and for a sense of agency in a world that often felt overwhelming. Now, let the ancient wisdom settle around you like a soft, familiar blanket. The air grows heavy with the scent of time itself, carrying the faint, sweet notes of ancient incense and the murmur of forgotten prayers. You feel the cool earth beneath your feet, a gentle anchor grounding you as the vast, star-dusted sky of Mesopotamia unfurls above, a celestial tapestry whispering tales of ages past. The urgency of deciphering omens or performing rituals begins to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of peace, a quiet understanding that all that needed to be done has been done. The ancient world, with its vibrant magic and its deep spiritual currents, has shared its secrets, and now it gently releases you, guiding you towards a deeper, more restorative stillness. Feel the weight of your limbs begin to soften, to become heavy, so wonderfully heavy. The thoughts that might have lingered begin to drift away, like leaves caught on a gentle breeze, carried out over the still waters of the Euphrates and into the quiet embrace of the night. There is nothing more you need to understand, nothing more you need to do than to simply rest. So, take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air fill your lungs, and as you exhale, let go of any remaining tension, any lingering thoughts. Breathe in the tranquility of this ancient night, and breathe out the day. Allow the gentle rhythm of your breath to become your sole focus, a soft, steady wave pulling you deeper, deeper into a peaceful, restorative sleep. Let the soothing sounds of this ancient world lull you into a profound and peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams.